Good morning. Welcome to the VDOT Professional Services Procurement Office Town Hall. Please let me introduce you to our two hosts for today's event, Executive Director of ACEC Virginia, Nancy Israel, and Executive Vice President of VTCA, Gordon Dixon.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. I'm Gordon Dixon with the Virginia Transportation Construction Alliance, and I'm pleased to partner with Nancy Israel with the American Council of Engineering Companies Virginia chapter in welcoming you to today's VDOT's Town Hall. Before we begin, I have a few logistical items to address with you. This town hall is being recorded, and a link will be shared on the VDOT Professional Services Procurement Office's website at the conclusion. After this morning's presentation, there will be a Q&A session. As an attendee, you are muted and you can type your questions into the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Nancy and I will be answering your questions or asking your questions to the VDOT staff at that point. In addition, if you have questions after today's session, please send them to either Nancy Israel at ACEC or to Jeff Bragdon at VTCA, who will submit those questions to VDOT, and those questions will be posted on their website. In the future, VDOT will hold additional Q&A sessions as needed. Now, as we begin, I would like to turn the discussion over to Nancy Israel from ACEC. Nancy?
Thanks, Gordon. ACEC and VTC are pleased to partner with VDOT on the classification discussion. We believe this realignment will allow both VDOT and the engineering industry more flexibility during the negotiation process. VDOT has carefully and methodically assessed the procurement of professional services with the industry to come up with a reduced number of classifications. The industry appreciates these efforts to make this an inclusive process, and we look forward to the implementation of fair and reasonable procurement procedures. We have to remember that although this is an excellent start, the process is just beginning. This is a complex topic with many moving parts. We've been working on this issue since 2019, first working with the Commissioner and Chief Moore. This year, we initiated more robust conversations with Chief Thrasher. Changing the methods used to procure professional services is an evolving process, and we need industry feedback. ACEC and VTCA are dedicated to working together with VDOT to identify these issues as they arise and provide recommendations to help this transition as beneficial and smooth as possible for everyone. Now I'd like to briefly introduce the Commissioner. Stephen Barish was appointed Commissioner of VDOT in 2018, and he oversees the largest state agency in the Commonwealth. Before being appointed as Commissioner, Barish served as Vice President with Kimley Horn and Associates and held several senior roles with VDOT over the past 26 years. He's a licensed professional engineer in Virginia and in Maryland. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nancy and Gordon, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to take a little bit of a step back in time, and let's go back to 2018, and in specific, back in April, when I first addressed the industry and the consultant community. At that time, we discussed the VDOT's business plan, and I'll recall that one of the 9 tenets that we had out there was to be business focused. And a couple of those points were recognizing time is money. VDOT needed to streamline its processes. But we also recognized that in order for us to deliver the program, we were going to focus on making sure that we operated in a fair and reasonable business environment. So since that time, I'd say that VDOT recognizes that in order to deliver the program, we need to have a vibrant and healthy consultant and contractor community. I'd say that as Nancy indicated, that we've made some significant strides in 2018 and 2019 to address issues that we're facing in the consultant community. Some more critical than others, and noted as we have addressed the FAR audit process, the timeliness of procurements, and the consistency of our procurements. We were poised to continue this great work in 2020 until COVID hit. And frankly, we focused on keeping the program moving forward and keeping our employees working. However, in early part of 2020, once the program was set, we began to revisit those outstanding issues. In March of 2020 of this year, we met with industry representatives to discuss those concerns with the procurement process. And what we heard at that time was that some of the issues that we had were changes that limited personnel, items that appeared to complicate the negotiations process, that frankly had unintentional consequences on how you and the department executed its work. Industry at that time did say that the RFP evaluation and selection process was working well. But industry also focused and advised us that we needed to emphasize the need for flexibility during the pre-award and contract negotiations. That was to allow industry to better focus and execute the work and to not have the department controlling means and methods. Frankly, we agree. Flexibility is the key in delivering the program and in operating in a fair and reasonable business process for both parties. During that March interaction, industry identified 3 goals and outcomes along with the department. First, review and solicit the input of a number of the standard classifications that were out there, including the environmental positions. Allow additional categories to be included for subject matter experts as needed. And then finally, allow for the flexibility of the number of staff in those classifications and no limits. Again, flexibility in determining how best to deliver VDOT's program in a collaborative manner. With that being said, I'd like for the chief engineer, Bart Thrasher, to be able to give some additional comments on this work group and our work in the early part of spring of this year. Bart?
Thank you, Commissioner Britch, and I appreciate everyone's here today at the town hall. We thank you all for taking time out to be with us. I think today represents an outstanding example of VDOT and the industry working together to address some concerns and come up with common goals and common solutions. As the commissioner said, we have to have a healthy and vibrant industry and a healthy and vibrant VDOT. And I think we do. And we also have to be able to sit down at a table, talk through issues, be able to sit down and look one another across the table and across each other in their eyes and be able to say, yes, I agree, or no, I don't, but let's work this out. And as long as we have that ability in which to do that, our industry and our abilities to correct issues will continue to be robust. In March 24th of this year, executives within VDOT sat down with our division administrators and talked about these issues. And we put together a task force made up of division heads and industry reps and gave them essentially 4 tasks. 1, review the 81 standards and what's the right number. And we asked them to develop a proposal for executives to be reviewed by May 14th. Working together, this group, this task force has been able to come up with that. And I think that is an example of what we want to see within the department and the industry. I want to thank the members of the task force for their efforts and diligence to get us to this situation, because we wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for these folks. And I want to specifically thank Dee, Susan, and John Maddox for the efforts they had to lead it. And we would not be here without the discussions we had with those 3 individuals over the past few months. I also want to thank Shailendra Patel for the leadership that he showed throughout this entire program over the years. Our program would not be here today without Shailendra's guidance and his leadership. And I want to thank Shailendra for the help that he gave us during this last few months. Now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Ms. Susan Keene, who is the state location and design engineer, and a much better design and location design engineer than the previous individual. So anyway, Susan, you have the floor.
Come on up. All right, thank you, Bart. We really do appreciate leadership's ability to set up this task force, listening to the concerns not only of industry, but of the divisions in delivering the program. Before we kind of set off on those goals that we were given and the tasks that we were given before us, I think there was there's a definite need to address how we got where we are. 2 years ago, I think there was a need and a desire for consistency among the divisions. And while that consistency is a good thing, I think we lost sight of the vision, which is efficient delivery of the program, not only for consultants, but for VDOT. We became too constrained and we got wrapped around the axle, as alluded to by the commissioner, dictating means and methods for the sake of consistency. And that actually led to inefficiencies and loss of trust and relationships between VDOT and industry. So the first goal of the task force as we set forth on this journey was to rebuild those relationships and that trust, open up the lines of communication so that we could hopefully discuss the issues that were before us and have that good conversation back and forth, making sure that both sides were listened to and concerns were addressed. And then the second goal and third goal, as Bart alluded to, was to take a look at those classifications, the 81 standard classifications that we had. What was the right number? Could we reduce them and simplify the process? In our first meeting, I know I kept saying we just need to follow the KISS principle. We need to keep it simple in order to not overcomplicate things and create inefficiencies. We also need to allow for that flexibility to effectively meet the needs of the division. I think some of the unintended consequences of those constraints that were added was the fact that we weren't able to efficiently meet our needs and the needs of the program to be delivered by the division. So those goals in and of themselves led to ensuring that whatever was negotiated at the end and through the process was fair and reasonable for both sides. And John Maddox led the effort for the consultant industry, and I think you want to pitch in here for a second here.
Yeah, I think we definitely appreciate VDOT's efforts and setting up this task force, really getting to focus on those goals with you all in the beginning and setting a path. And I thought a defined end date was very helpful. It was probably one of the most productive sessions I've had with VDOT and dealing with some concerns in a long time. So it was very refreshing, and I think resulted in really defining goals. And I think it's going to pay big dividends moving forward. You can go ahead, Susan.
All right. So from the VDOT divisions, we had a fairly good cross-section of folks, the end users, the divisions who really set the scope of work and know what needs need to be met. And we looked at not only what needs the divisions had, but also what concerns industry was bringing to us at the same time. So from environmental's perspective, we had Patrick Hughes from L&D, of course, that was me, and Ali from Ops, and Kendall Wallace from Structure and Bridge, and Dee from Traffic Engineering. And we also had Carrie Bates from Construction, although in the very beginning of this effort, those construction positions and construction contracts were taken off the table. So the focus here today is really on those professional services contracts that fall under environmental, L&D, Ops, Structure and Bridge, and Traffic Engineering and Materials. The cross-section of the divisions, I think, did help lead and keep us focused on the goals, which is the delivery of the program. And John, I don't know if you want to talk about the cross-section of industry.
Yeah, from industry side, ACEC and VTCA set out from the very beginning to get a good cross-section of firms from DBE, SWAM, mid-sized firms, larger firms, and a cross-section across the state, and people that had been involved in the projects and negotiations over the last few years. The committee members are Mo Kim, Chris Lester, Kevin Bocock, Amy Morris, Eric Burke, and Brad Craig, and myself. We had a lot of great discussions just internally to be able to provide VDOT that feedback. You could see that cross-section working and coming up with the solutions that we needed. We also helped facilitate it with the help of Nancy Israel from ACEC and Jeff Bragdon in these meetings. So it was a very good group to be able to solve problems. We kept it small enough to where we could react, I think, fairly quickly to the schedule and VDOT's request for information.
All right, next slide. So on the next slide, we're looking at the proposals that was put forth. Before the first meeting that we had in April, we asked the consultant industry and internally, we put together our own proposals for the reduction of those classifications. And what I was very happy to see was the alignment between the two proposals. At the end of the day, I think we were both looking for that flexibility for the classifications in order to add classifications and that flexibility of experience and be able to cover all of the technical specialties that we had. So VDOT's proposal in the beginning was the 12 classifications, which were 6 engineering positions and 6 technical specialist positions. And the way I like to think of it is buckets. So as we looked at the rates of the individuals for those classifications, we tried to bucket folks using salary survey data, that is market data from the private side. We bucketed those particular specialties together. And I think at the end of the day, we ended up with the 12, like I said, the 6 engineering classifications and the 6 technical specialists. And John, do you want to talk about the industry proposal?
Yeah, when we got together as an industry, we actually came up with 14 classifications, and it was very similar to what VDOT, and they were both done independently. We had 4 engineering classifications, and then the old task manager, we thought VDOT would want the project manager in its own classification, and then a subject matter expert classification. It was very similar for the technical, your environmental, those different services that are vital to the VDOT program, of having that same graduation of people within a salary range. And so it really matched fairly well. I know the industry was surprised that we got to that kind of number that quickly, because it does simplify a lot of things we felt going forward.
So in those April meetings, obviously the April 9th was instrumental in the agreement to move forward with a reduced number of classifications. And then it was a matter of how do we implement that process. So the meetings after the April 9th meeting, including April 30th and the virtual meetings that we've had since then, we talked through the experience and licensure requirements. We wanted to add that flexibility in for folks who are highly experienced that may or may not have their PE. We wanted to be able to provide flexibility to allow top performers to be promoted without necessarily needing a specific year range. So we did look at overlap of the experience levels, and we talked through that. The other thing that we looked at was the technical specialists and trying to work through, could we standardize the experience and the qualifications? Well, since the technical specialists, as opposed to the engineers, the technical specialists covered a wide gamut of disciplines. So trying to put in certifications and years of experience that align with the technical specialist, we reached the conclusion that we had to really pull those into the working titles, which is what we were crosswalking with the 81 classifications into those different classifications. The nice thing about the use of the staffing roster, which is another thing that was developed during this process and in these meetings and reviewed, is it allowed us to really take a holistic look at the groups and make sure that we were putting the folks in the right buckets when it came to salary ranges, so that we got a large number of folks to establish a better average rate. So at the end of the day, you are developing 12 rates, and we'll get into the additional of the technical specialist here in a moment, but you're developing a very limited number of rates for each firm. But the pool of individuals in there is a much better variety to where you establish a better rate, not only for the industry, but for VDOT. And that actually helped us work through that process as we were looking at firm staffing and plugging that into it. So we continued working through that. We also looked at the working titles, and it seemed to expand very quickly as we looked at the granularity of the rates and how we needed to address those. But at the end of the day, the working titles are going to be what's going to be used for the key personnel, and we'll get into that in just in a moment. But we wanted to simplify the rate negotiation process, simplify the labor estimates and how we put together scope and fees, simplify adding staff and changing out staff utilizing those new classifications. The next slide. So we took this to the executives in May, and there was very quickly a realization that we had really truly worked together, and this was a culmination of those efforts, and the acceptance of the proposal that we put in front of leadership was very quickly realized, because we did work together to come up with with not only the proposal but the process. But what we did realize is we needed to be able to test drive the pilot or test drive the process using a pilot. We had current contracts underway. Those RFPs were issued using the 81 classifications, and we were able to crosswalk those classifications into the new system and then use that for the negotiation. And this really, the test drive really helped us to make sure that our guidance and our documentation of the process and make sure that everything fit in the right bucket at the end of the day. That test drive was a good mechanism to be able to really refine that guidance. The other thing that came out of that executive meeting is that the task force needed to do a town hall before we had a full rollout. So that's why we're here today, to ensure that there are no surprises as the next round of RFPs come out, and that we are all on the same page as what's needed there. So John, do you want to?
Through all these meetings, I think it was a really healthy discussion. There was a lot of compromise, I think, on both sides of VDOT and the industry to get, to what we feel is the best solution moving forward. And, it did in this executive meeting, when you have the executive staff of VDOT just going around to each of the industry meetings and just asking you, is this the way we want to go? And it was a very positive and resounding thing to move forward with this process. And so we do appreciate that. And I think you're going to go through, Susan, some of the classifications next.
Yes, so on the next slide, we have the engineer classifications, which are the 6 engineering classifications. You will see there's an overlap in experience. You will see there's some overlap in qualifications and licensure. We wanted to be able to provide that flexibility to industry to be able to utilize folks that they have on staff that may or may not be licensed. There again, we wanted to be able to utilize those top performers to take on more responsibility on projects where their technical experience and their abilities lead them. The other thing that we discussed was adding that subject matter expert category, which helped us identify those individuals that we may need on a specific basis for the different contracts that we have out there. So in order to bring them on without necessarily putting them in the senior engineer role, and mixing them in with everybody else, they're actually separated so that we can identify them and we can utilize them on an as-needed basis as we roll through these contracts. You will also notice that engineer 1 through 3 is really a multidisciplinary classification. So in other words, there's not going to be discipline-specific criteria or responsibilities or qualifications for the engineer 1 through 3 level. We did that to be able to reduce the number of working titles and to keep the classifications fairly succinct. At least with my experience, and I think it was echoed with industry in working as a consultant, when you're in those entry levels, you're working on all sorts of things. There's not really a subject matter that you are truly an expert at, or you're constrained to. So you might be working on hydraulics, you might be working on roadway, you might be working on traffic or TMT. So there's definitely that cross section that is needed in the lower levels of the engineering classification. As we get up into the engineering 4 through 6, that is where we end up with the discipline specific, and that allows for the individual divisions to really put in the certifications and the things that they're looking for in RFPs, because that is where the key personnel will come from, is from those classifications and those working titles that are developed by the divisions. So next slide. So the technical specialist, obviously we have technical specialist levels 1 through 7 now. As we worked through the pilot, we saw the need to add an additional classification on the technical specialist because it does cover multidisciplines. The granularity needed based on the experience and making sure that we have folks in the right bucket. So you can think of it as you're bucketing those personnel that are in the tech specialist 3. There's similar folks in there or similar rates in there. So those are all bucketed together to develop a better average rate at the end of the day. This is a major change in the approach, but it allows really for the granularity allows for promotion and advancement. The certification and experience is going to be handled in the working titles and not in the actual chart. So as you go through the working titles and the crosswalk, you'll see the qualifications and experience that are needed there. So John, you want to handle the next slide?
Now, Susan asked just us to wrap up kind of what the industry task force felt, about where we're heading, and to be, out front, the complexity of the working titles was something that we had a concern about. When you go through and you do it the first time, you'll probably be asking yourself, what was John Maddox thinking? But I think as you do it, and I've done it myself, and you go through it a second time, it gets simpler each time you do it. But what are the benefits of this process is that we're going to have that staffing roster in the end that we can use very similar roster on multiple contracts. In this process, we really talked about letting the scope of work control in the RFP. We had gotten to where the classifications were controlling what you could do on a project, and we needed to get back to putting the project first. The negotiations, like Susan said, it's going to be a larger number of staff in each of those. You're going to end up with a better average, which I think is going to have a fairer rate for both industry and VDOT. Being able to have multiple people in the classifications, what we think's needed to meet a project, we'll have that flexibility. In other words, you'll be able to control our means and methods. It really simplifies putting together the task orders and your cost proposals with the reduced classifications, and the invoicing is going to be a lot simplified. We did talk a lot about, adding staff to a contract. That was something that was getting more complex, and we're going to be able to do that at the VDOT contract manager level by just filling out a small amount of data on the working titles and that staff roster. You're going to be able to add staff a lot quicker to these projects. Key staff, you'll still need to go through the discussion and provide a resume for changing out those key staff. Another big thing that we talked about was eliminating the field rates for contracts that don't really require that. It'll be RFP specific. If you have an RFP, it'll list that out there. But that was a lot of effort we were all spending, and it really never hardly assigning someone to that field rate. Susan, you want to wrap up?
Sure thing. So at the end of the day, I think we had a lot of good discussion within the task force, and the task force will continue as we identify new issues and problems that we need to solve, especially with the implementation of the process and where we're rolling this process out in conjunction with Dee, who is up next with the staffing roster. Dee is the new head of the Professional Services Procurement Office. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dee and Chris Lester from HMTV.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susan and John. Really great input. It was just really a really beneficial period since April meeting with the industry across the board as we were putting together these various solutions. I'm really excited to be in this new role, working with industry in this new perspective. My time in traffic engineering, I learned a lot and worked with various industry partners. So I'm really looking forward to working with you all and eventually meeting you, many of you in person. So as Susan and John had said, we worked closely with the task force members and the divisions and the classes and the working titles. We knew that that was really what was important to establishing a strong foundation for the teams. So we worked with the divisions in an effort to define the responsibilities and qualifications so that you all would be able to select accurately where your team most belonged. There are a number of them. We have 13 classes and we have 64 working titles, but they really work like a menu of options to choose from. Although there are the 64 titles, we will gain efficiency using them in the grouped buckets, as Susan indicated, with the 13 classes. So the divisions combined certain positions like the operations and traffic engineering work together to blend the traffic specialists and ITS specialists together so that we have fewer positions there. We also added a lot of various positions that were really missed in the previous 81 standard classifications. We added the data analyst that will be used by multiple divisions, by traffic engineering, operations, materials. That one will be a really useful position to make certain that your staff are placed adequately when they're doing some of that data analysis on your various contracts. We also added important positions like technical project manager, contract manager, data scientist that can be used across various contracts. It's not just going to be specific to one division. Flexibility is the key to all of these. And most of the criteria really is very flexible with the way that we have described these positions. The years of service right now we have established them based on our estimate of what would be at an entry level, mid-level, and more senior level positions. But we are going to allow some flexibility to that so that if you need to place someone in a higher level of working title because they're, as Susan said, they're a superstar, they're a high performer, the years of service are flexible so that we're going to, and they overlap, so that there's going to be the ability to, place people in different levels of the working titles. So you have folks that really take the initiative and they work hard and they want to push forward in their career. And then you have the folks that are a little more average. We were really trying to make these working titles fit well for the real world, not with hard, fast, where you end up in a square peg round hole situation. So that's where the task force feels that we are, the divisions feels that we are, working through the pilot has really been an interesting process to demonstrate that as well, that we're really achieving some great improvements in that area. Other thing that we had done, as Susan had said, is simplifying those junior engineer levels. I believe has really been beneficial. We have those first categories as design engineer, planner A, B, and C. Was a great move so that we have those 16, or previously 16 positions are now down to 3. So we have really tried to make some very smart and wise decisions as we have established the working titles and then tweaked them and growing through the process. And this is going to be a developmental process. We're not done. We'll continue this over as we need to. We are going to add various positions, add various working titles, and really refine this as we go. So one of the beneficial things, and I know that everybody's interested in, is how will these work in the RFPs? I believe Susan mentioned, we will still name the key personnel listed by the class and the working title in the RFP itself, in addition to the numbers related to the key personnel. So that will stay in a very similar manner to what you're used to. But then we will list a general list of the working titles without being prescriptive on the various levels. You, as the firm, get to decide the various levels of the working titles that you want on your team, as well as the number of staff in those positions. That's where we're tapping into that flexibility and trying to allow you to establish your team to meet the scope as you see best. So really trying to allow you that flexibility to establish the best team. Next slide, please. Our list of working titles will be in an Excel spreadsheet, as will our pre-award staffing roster. You're going to be able to, good news is we're going to be eliminating the blue forms and replacing them with the staffing roster that we can use over and over. That placement can be done using a drop-down list. You're going to select the best position for your staff based on their skill sets and their qualifications. The levels of working titles are provided to meet all levels of needs, from entry level to national expert. The selection will be made based on years of experience, education, and licensure. For example, if you have fewer years of experience, you may choose a lower level of class and working title. But once you factor in the education, let's say you have someone that's right out of college, but they have their master's degree, you may notch them up in the level of working title, so that you're trying to accurately capture what is unique about their skill sets and why they're compensated in the manner that they are. For instance, those with those higher levels of education and certifications often receive the increase in pay. So we want you all to be able to select those people and staff them appropriately, represented on your staffing roster. It's going to be a really powerful tool. I know that it will take some time to complete the first time. It'll get easier, as you go through it. We're going to work very closely with you from my office and from your lead division. I am going to recommend that as we send out a pre-award packet to a firm, we are going to hold a meeting with my office, the lead division, and the prime, along with the points of contact from the sub-consultants as well. We want to be able to walk you all through the staff placement and this pre-award process so that you best understand how this will be specific to your team. And you can talk with us, answer any questions that you have. We really want this to be a partnership, and you guys will have the opportunity to go through it. Then my staff will go through it, the lead division will go through it, and we'll work in an iterative process until we have your staff placed in the most effective class and working title, and achieve those fine, healthy team, well-balanced team with those fair and reasonable rates. So one question that has been asked of us multiple times is that, are you locked into the placement that you make at this time? No, you're not. Just because you choose them with one particular contract doesn't mean that you're locked into the future of those. You can customize your team for each specific contract. You'll use the same roster. You're going to update it because, it's going to be a beneficial tool to you. You'll update it, but if you're, submitting a pre-award roster for a traffic engineering contract, but a year from now, you're going to submit one on operations contract, you're going to take that and you're going to refine the input on the roster because you may have different staff. You may have a different number of staff. So you're going to revise your team accordingly and tweak it and revise it and use the work that you invested the first time to submit on the second pre-award submission as well. So it will really be an iterative process that you're going to be able to use this tool over and over. And you are not locked into those positions that you've chosen on one contract and using them in the same position on another contract. For example, right now we've had one in the pilot where we had a staff person that was placed in Tech Specialist 4 role in the traffic engineering, and then in another contract, they were listed as a Tech Specialist 5 for that contract. But that was completely acceptable because there was 120 staff from that firm on the traffic engineering. There was only 20 staff from that firm on the SUE contract. So it allows you to use your staff and the numbers and the variety of your staff and place them in the appropriate class and working title to meet your needs for that specific contract. That's what the flexibility offers you, and it offers you that ability to build a strong team to your needs and to meet the needs of the division. Chris, did you want to chime in?
Sure, thanks, Dee. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And in case you all haven't heard it, the approach from the start of this was flexibility. And I think the important thing to note is that is both for VDOT as well as industry, really working together and trying to come up with the right solution for each project, each task order. So the idea behind this roster, it helps you define, your team and your work plan as you're working through the pre-award elements here. So there's a lot of pre-planning that can go into it. The other thing we really don't want to miss the note on this. There is an investment that will go into your initial contract or first several contracts, but you will find that this gets much simpler and you'll have information in a much more refined way that will expedite this pre-award submittal as well as the negotiation process. So you have to hold on just a little bit to get to those, but there'll be real payoffs with that as it relates to additional contracts or future contracts, as well as what was discussed before, which is dealing with any staff adjustments, promotions, additions as you go through a current contract. This one form will be used across the board and will be that one tool you'll get to use. There won't be a confused process on whether you can get people added or how added. You'll find that it's going to be a much more collaborative process as we go through the negotiations and even the pre-award work. So Dee, I appreciate you mentioning that. I tell everybody, please take advantage of those early meetings and get a lot of questions out. It'll pay off in the end and really help you get the right team and the right classification as you move forward.
Agreed. We're really looking to improve our communication overall and just really approaching this as a teamwork effort. So I think we're ready for the next slide. Yeah. Right. So on the staffing roster and placing your team, it is really it's not a precise science, but it's more like art. You're not assembling a perfect puzzle piece with strict limits and with narrow options, but instead it's like you're playing Tetris. You all remember the 90s version of Tetris, where you match the blocks in the perfect pattern. So this is what we're going to do here is we're going to match your team to the scope in the best way possible. We're going to work with VDOT to establish the best fit and work together to place people in where they're grouped, not only by their skill sets and their qualifications, but also similar in their pricing structure as well. And that will help us when we're in the negotiation phase. It's really going to streamline our negotiation phase. Personally, in some situations, we've had negotiations that have lasted months and months due to various challenges that we were experiencing in the process. That is going to be eliminated. You are going to have the investment of time of going through and placing your staff. In some of the pilots, we had up 379 folks on a staffing roster. Well, that takes some time. It's the time and investment of each firm. The prime places theirs, the individual subs place their own staff, and then the prime will combine them all onto one roster. But there again, that investment in time will pay off on this contract as well as your future contracts when you can use that again to your advantage, only with any necessary modifications for future contracts. One of the things that I want to do in an effort to help industry really understand how these work, we just did not have enough time today to cover all of the details of the Excel spreadsheets that's going to be the classes and working titles, and then the roster itself. So I'm going to establish some informational sessions. We are going to start those in the third week in September. We're going to host those through our partners, VTCA and ACEC, and we'll probably have one each week for 4 weeks. It'll be the same information shared at each session. So you can attend one session, you can attend multiple sessions. There will also have some Q&A. We're going to have some open discussion. I really want to have an opportunity for you all to see this solution and realize that although it is an investment in time and the first time that you do it, it will be really beneficial. And we want to provide you as much information as possible to help you with this transition from those 81 standard classifications and blue forms that were less than desirable to this new model with the working titles and classes and this roster. So we're really going to reach out and try to provide some solid information. Also, I think I'd already told you guys that we're going to hold a kickoff meeting with the lead divisions, the primes, and the sub-consultants to walk through the new roster as we send out those pre-award packets. Our goal there is there again to reiterate the message about and the instructions to everyone. We know that sometimes that there's, it's like playing that game you did in school where you started out with one set of instructions and you pass it along to multiple people. Well, with this situation, we did not want that to be the case. We want to sit down with the prime and the subconsultants. We want to meet, the needs of our big firms, our small firms, our medium firms. We want to be able to partner with everyone and our lead divisions also at that kickoff meeting to make certain that everybody has the same set of instructions and everybody's been given an opportunity to ask their questions. We really want to make this a beneficial process as much as we possibly can. And Chris, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just a couple of notes here, Dee, related to this. So again, just to continue to reiterate, this gives you options and the ability to right size your team, the right folks for a single project, for an on-call contract, or even multiple contracts that you may be looking at any one time. You get to work with VDOT, fit the team to the specific needs, and at the right pay bands. This all kind of links together. So, a couple of things that were identified there, as John mentioned earlier around industry needs or wants as we went through this process. This really helped us connect VDOT as well as industry to maximize what we could do here. And as noted here at the bottom, the roster form and the Excel format right now, the pivot tables and the future opportunities here that will be there. This is information that's going to help industry too. These are not just analytic tools for VDOT. They're really designed for the overall team approach to the project. And you'll be able to use these tabs and these reporting analysis tools to help you as you assign your team members, get them into the right classifications, and make sure you have those options and that flexibility as you go to perform the work.
I agree. Those are going to be some exciting tools. We've seen some demos of them already, and it's going to be really, really beneficial. So right now we are using the pivot tables, but we know that those are coming. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk about those and show you examples of those in those September informational sessions.
Yeah, we're really excited about those tools, Dee.
Awesome. So feedback on the pilot.
Yep, we'll go to the next slide here. So nope, sorry, went one too fast. It was just catching up on my screen. So what you'll see at the beginning here, this is the original direction as we initially got together from the commissioner, chief engineer, and the task force. Three primary elements here. We wanted to establish a method to achieve fair and reasonable rates. We wanted to establish guardrails and have data-driven processes. So from this perspective, we looked at it really from an industry process and making sure that we're following through on what we say we're going to do. So as you're looking at putting your teams together and those types of things, make sure these are the teams that are going to deliver on the job. We're not looking for firms to drop every single person that works for their firm onto a rate roster unless they're planned to be engaged. This is a kind of a self-policing effort we need to undertake as industry. So just be mindful of that. We're really looking to define and refine our project teams and our work plans as we're going through this. Again, the process in and of itself has the flexibility to make adjustments as a contract may change or a task order could change. Those are going to be built into that. And then the last thing is establish that method to add staff after the MOA is signed with justification. So you'll end up having the same requirements, the resumes and those types of things, but it'll be a very streamlined process back into that original staff roster from the task, and really allow VDOT as well as you to assess how those new individuals or even firms coming into it fit within the overall project. So it'll again expedite any additions or negotiation processes that go on there. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Reed Adams and Brian Stickles to talk a little more about the pilot program.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Reed Adams. I'm the Geospatial Program Manager for Location and Design. As part of my duties, I am the contract manager for the statewide survey and SUE contracts. I've been with the department for about 10 years and completed 4 procurements, and awarded about 16 contracts. We are in the process of procuring SUE contracts this year. AccuMark and JMT have been selected, and we have been participating in the pilot procurement process with them. The new process provides 13 class groupings, 6 for engineering and 7 for technical specialists. Working titles that were once very rigid are now expanded into multiple levels. I'll give you an example. The CAD technician title is expanded to CAD technician A through D, and our SUE crew chief is expanded into levels A through C. Land surveyor levels A through D are now provided. This allows easier placement of personnel based on their qualifications. Consultants and VDOT work together to select the appropriate working titles. Then the class grouping automatically populates in the roster form spreadsheet. We were very flexible with our working titles and levels in the pilot program to fit our needs. The expanded working titles allow for a better fit to the scope of services for VDOT tasks. These titles allow for entry level, junior level, and senior level staffing with no limitations on our number of personnel. The new process is straightforward. For our contracts, communication was the key. Ended up being a fair and reasonable outcome for both. Make sure you take advantage of the training when it's provided. I highly recommend starting your rosters early. It makes the rest of the process go much smoother. It took time to go through these pilots, but long term, we ended up learning a lot. The next group of contracts will be able to move forward very quickly with these lessons learned. Now I'm going to turn it over to Brian Stickles. He's up next. He is the Senior Vice President for JMT. He's been there for about 34 years. Brian is also the JMT Contract Manager for the L&D SUE contracts, and we have been working together on this pilot process.
Thank you, Reed. Good morning. Our experience in the pilot procurement process was very, very positive. The working titles at first seemed a little rigid, but when we expanded them into the multiple levels, that really was the trick to getting all our folks placed where they needed to be. The levels provided the flexibility, and you've heard that word a lot this morning, flexibility with the working titles to keep the process fair. The key for us was really communicating and addressing both with VDOT and the consultants, or especially our subs, any concerns regarding the proper class groupings. The expansion of those working titles really allowed us to cover all the categories needed from the RFP, which was challenging considering we had a lot of different folks that seemed on typical limited services contract. We had engineering, we had surveying, we had SUE, we had photogrammetry, we had 3D scanning. So we had a lot of categories to cover. And we were able to put all levels of the staff from entry level, junior to senior in categories appropriate to the specific level. It was a straightforward process, but it was time consuming. We had a large team, and Reed and I, we just felt like we needed to go through every member to make sure we were in agreement with the working title and level. And it was important because it was the first one. And as JMT is the prime, we reviewed with each of our sub-consultants. The dialogues were candid, they were fair. And in the end, we did change a few based on these conversations. So we were flexible. Even though it was a timely process, having those sheets now set up is going to make it much easier in the future. Like Reed said, take advantage of the training and keep the lines of communication open. Both parties in our case were determined to make this work and saw the benefits moving forward. And in the end, the strong communication between Reed and myself really made this a much easier process. Dee?
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I would really like take a moment to thank everyone that has been involved in the pilot, Reed and Brian and Carol and Van in traffic engineering, Afan, Ramesh, all the buyers in my office. And we're beginning to work with Paul Sadal on the project specific contract. Just really, really phenomenal work, time and effort and energy, a lot of great ideas. Honestly, we started with Carol and Van in traffic engineering early on. And of course, their traffic engineering is always near and dear to my heart. So it was a process of kind of partnering together and working through that and trying to, develop the new processes and working with ATCS, who's the firm selected for that particular award. And they came with some great ideas. You know, we literally made some changes to the working titles and classes list based on some recommendations made by ATCS. So we are open to really making the best process. So we are going in the process right now of sending out some questionnaires to those participants in the pilot. And Brian and Reed have filled them out, and we're going to be getting those to our other participants so that you guys can give us your feedback. Really looking at have we met the goals that we established in this? You know, the goals that you see here, and the questions are going to kind of bring you to that and give us then some honest feedback. What are some things that we can do better? Are there some other ideas that you would like to share with us? So we're going to be looking forward to incorporating that into the process as we roll forward. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the pilot and the number of firms that were involved. There were seven total procurements that were involved in the pilot. There were 6 of them that were limited term on-call contracts based on 4 advertisements. There were multi-awards, of course. And then we have 1 project-specific bridge contract. That project-specific contract, based on its project schedule, unfortunately, we didn't quite as far with that one as we had originally hoped. We're just now in staff selection for that. So I'm going to be working with Paul and his team on that very soon, this week, matter of factly. But the limited term on-call contracts, just tremendous success there. 5 of the 6 were successfully completed through the negotiation process. And the last one is very, very close as well. So overall, it was about a little more than 1,500 staff that were placed in the various working titles and classes. And you can see the breakout of the number of engineering classes we had versus technical positions. And I know that it may seem, you know, say there are 64 working classes, may seem like, well, that's not much less than what we had before. But I can tell you, they're much, much different than what we had before. We have these positions described to adequately meet your needs, as Reed said, with the various, Brian said, with the various very specific needs on their contract. That 64 positions also includes the environmental positions now. So all the environmental are included in those working titles. So we have a much different layout and a much different, we cover it in a much different way with the 64 working titles that we have right now. You're going to be able to really easily identify which working title that your staff fit into, and then what their levels are. And then we're going to work with you on those levels. So it'll be an iterative partnership that we're going to take on together. So the vast majority of as far as the rates and the negotiation process was really very simplified once we had gone through the staff placement, because quite honestly, once you place people based on their qualifications, and then you fine tune it a little bit, you know, based on their rate of pay, they really aligned really well with the fair and reasonable rate goals that we had established. We are utilizing workforce salary data to establish those goals, and we are going to be updating that workforce salary data once per year. And it's really aligning really well with what industry is paying. There will always be a few categories that we have to negotiate because, you know, that's just the way that it is. You can't be exactly perfect. You know, we're not going to let the perfect get in the way of the good. But the vast majority of all of the classes fit very well into those rate goals, those fair and reasonable rate goals. So the negotiation processes honestly took much less time than previous, and we're excited about that. Next slide. Now to talk about our future of the procurement task force and our office in general. I am excited to be taking on this new challenge. Our staff is already busy working on incorporating the classes and the working titles into the RFPs and the MOA so that we can finalize these pilot procurements and you know, get to the MOA stage. We're preparing for those informational sessions that we've shared with you about. We're going to be putting together some guidance documents and some FAQs for you to use during that. We are also going to reestablish our consultant coordination committee at VDOT so that we reach out to, right now we've been really focused on working with the divisions that have had the pilots, you know, and then those in the procurement task force. We're going to really reach out, and we want to make certain that we reach each of the points of contact that are working with these consultant contracts. You know, typically if there are some challenges that our internal stakeholders are experiencing, there's some of the challenges that you guys are experiencing in the industry. So we want to work with both our internal partners and our procurement task force to really identify what are our priorities going forward, what are the issues that we need to address with revisions in the manual, and to really approach those and outline a plan and begin to prepare for the changes that are going to occur in the manual. One of the announcements that we have made most recently has been the SF 330 Part 2 that has been eliminated. That was actually in the work in the spring. I believe, several industry partners were working with VDOT on that. So we've replaced that announcement on our webpage. So if you can take a look at that. We've already received some questions about the potential need to revise those forms, or, you know, questions, can you revise those forms? But I'll reply back and say, please do not revise those forms. We have provided the Word version of the documents so that you can easily incorporate them into your expression of interest, but we ask that you leave them in the format that they are. You can provide a combination of information regarding on-call contracts and project-specific contracts as your examples, and you can use graphics where necessary, and from both primes and subconsultants examples. So that's the news on the SF 330. Another very important issue that we've kind of touched on a couple times here today is the method to consider promotions on contracts, and then also the method to add staff to contracts. We know that our current manual has very strong limitations on both of those topics, but we are going to be addressing the need to change those. That was some of the challenges that we had heard throughout this process, that we need some flexibility, that these contracts are not static tools. They are tremendous resources for both the agency as well as our consultant industry, but we need to be able to use them like they're living documents. So we are going to establish a form that will allow you to, and criteria that will allow you to add staff to contracts by submitting the appropriate information. And it's going to be a very streamlined process. We don't want to make it any more challenging for you guys than for us. And then the method for promotions, that's going to be used to a very similar form as well. It's going to provide us some justification of, like, how has this person's role changed on this contract? How has this person's role changed in your firm? So that we can really make it contract specific of, if they're taking on new leadership roles, if they're taking on some project management roles, we want to recognize that. And of course, always, if there's a change, an increase in certifications and licensure and those type of things. So there again, we'll have some announcements that are coming out about this soon. Hopefully we'll be able to actually talk to you about some of those things at those informational sessions starting in late September. Overall, I'm really excited about the alignment of our office under the administration directorate. My background is procurement for many, many years. I'm just going to go with that. And I'm excited to begin to align our division's principles with those that are similar in ASD, and trying to provide some of that consistency that we can across the board. As far as my priorities for our division, my first and foremost priority is to keep our procurements moving. It's really critical for our divisions and the industry for us to meet those business needs and to modify our business processes and to keep our procurements moving forward effectively and efficiently with really good quality outcomes. My second level of priorities will be our recruitment. We have had identified for us the commissioner and Lisa have realized the significant need for resources on this team, and they have provided us a total of 8 full-time positions and 1 hourly position. So we will be recruiting right now. We have some recruitments that are out there right now. We're going to have a total of 4 buyers, a business analyst, and a lead negotiator to work with the divisions across the board. The lead negotiator is going to partner with the lead divisions to provide consistency in the process and work with to meet both the firm's needs and the division's needs as we work toward those contract delivery. Our business process improvement is a really huge priority to me as well. That's going to mean taking on the manuals and identifying the various improvements that we need to take. I would ask that everyone please be patient and understand that this will take time. It's a really comprehensive process. You know, you often have to make a decision. Are you going to do things fast, or are you going to do things right? And so I really want for us and my new division and our various partners and stakeholders out there that we have an investment in doing things right. So I would ask for your patience in that process, but I do want to hear from you. I want you all to be able to, you know, contact us and let us know if there are needs and there are issues that you're having, because we really want to incorporate those into our business processes. My foundational principles are good communication and good customer service. And, you know, while we are managing expectations that this is going to take time, I look forward to working with you all in this process. And I think we are probably ready for our Q&A session.
Gordon? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I couldn't hit the unmute button. Thank you, VDOT. Greatly appreciate that. Now's the time for your questions. Obviously, as you put in here, you can type your Q&A, your questions in the Q&A section. For those questions we don't get to, because we do have a limited amount of time, we will forward those questions to VDOT, and VDOT will be able to answer those questions on their website. So without further ado, Nancy, you want to go ahead and start tackling some of these questions?
Sure. A couple easy ones I'm just going to answer for you first. As a reminder, the presentation and all the related materials will be on the website. Dee, is there a specific place?
We will be placing those as a link off of the Professional Service Procurement Office page there and under the Business Center.
Okay. All right. And then someone asked about questions about the new RFP proposal process. Those can go to either me or Jeff Bragdon. So just so you have that information. All right, so the questions that were submitted in advance, we're going to start with those. And some of those were answered. So if you don't hear your questions, it's because it was discussed. So the first one we have talks about the procurement manual. It's being revised. It doesn't necessarily fit with what was there in the past. So the question, 2-part question, what's VDOT going to do to clearly communicate the current practices and policies to staff that are different than what's currently been going on and the changes that are happening? And then when do you think a revised manual will be available?
We're first going to, as I said, stand up our consultant coordination committee, and we're going to review some of the challenges and identify some of those priorities. I think I just talked about that a little bit ago, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. So we are going to, this is a really huge priority to us. We're first going to issue some clarifications with some memos and IIMs to address some of the most critical issues, as I said, about the adding staff or modifying staff on the contract, as well as promoting staff. So we'll do those through some clarifications. There may be some other low-hanging fruit that we identify and choose to issue some clarifications to provide some instant clarification on those issues. Otherwise, we're going to go through the process of opening some dialogue with our internal stakeholders to identify some of the areas that we need to refine and tweak. And we'll be issuing a manual. I don't have a timeline on it, honestly, until we kind of start to get our arms around the magnitude of it. And quite honestly, adding staff is my first priority on that, because that's really a capital investment for me, is to expand our team and to get that team really approaching these good solutions, working collectively together forward on that. So it will be, believe me, it will be as soon as we possibly can get that out there. I want to say it took this last revision 2+ years to really get where we are. So I don't expect it to take nearly that long. I will tell you that. So that is my commitment, is we're going to work through it as diligently and as expediently as we can.
Great. Let's move on to some of the process questions that we've had on this. So will future RFPs ask for and/or limit specific labor classifications for staff? And if so, which classes will be shown? The old labor class, working title, the new classifications, et cetera?
Yes. The future RFPs will include working titles and class levels for key personnel, along with the specific number of key personnel that can be included. But then a general list of the working titles will be named, but no levels will be indicated. Each firm will be able to choose from the list of working titles that are included and establish the level on how to meet the scope based on their own team. They can decide the number in each class and each working title. We are just going to provide a list of working titles that are specific to that type of scope of contract.
All right. The next question is, will promotions of staff be considered during the length of the process of the contract? Sorry, not the process. If so, what do you know what the process is going to be at this point? Because it's reasonable to think that over 4 years, a lot of term contracts, that people will have additional qualifications.
Yes, I think I'd hit this also. This is definitely one that we've heard loud and clear. We know that these contracts are not static documents, that you all, they live in the real world. You have staff change, you have staff turnover, you have staff promotions. We definitely are going to be accommodating that, and that will be some of our top priorities, to get some clarifications out there and the method to make these changes out there ASAP.
Great, Dee, appreciate that. This question is in relation to Bid Express. Will VDOT be providing additional guidance as it relates to the Bid Express portion of the procurement process? For example, will there be any anticipated changes to requirements for DPOR, SCC, firm data information within Bid Express?
Honestly, I have not had an opportunity to really get to dig in and get my arms around Bid Express at this point. My main focus has been, the delivery of our procurements and the delivery of the results of this pilot right now, followed closely by the recruitment process. So at this point, I will be digging into more things like Bid Express. And if this is an area that we need some improvement, where we need some guiding documents, I am certainly open to providing those and making the necessary improvements in that. As I said, I've already had some questions about can people alter those forms that we have revised, with the free form and replacing the SF 330. And at this point, I want everyone to just use the form that is there. But that will even be a process that we're going to look at in the future. I can't take on everything at one time, but so that's where I want to manage expectations, and where we're going to establish a list of priorities and, try to, work with our procurement task force and work with our internal CCC committee to really hear what are the pain points that we're experiencing, and what are the list of priorities, and how do we need to establish those to make certain that we're trying to accomplish what we need to in the right order. And if Bid Express is one of those, either, wherever it falls in that list, we will certainly address it.
Thanks. All right, we're going to move on to questions that were submitted under proposals and EOIs. In attachment A, key personnel resumes, does VDOT anticipate consultants including a brief bio paragraph for each key personnel in this form, or does the form not allow? It appears you're only asking for the required information in the form, and a key personnel bio paragraph is not necessarily required.
I would say complete the form as it is directed. If there's no place for that, then the narrative bio, just instead, the information for their bio will be gleaned from the facts that you present with the rest of the form. If there's no place for that, then there you will not insert it. So complete the form as it is necessary, and we will establish the facts based off of what you do provide us.
Great, Dee, I appreciate that. And I think you answered a number of the other proposal questions earlier, so may skip those for now because you definitely did a pretty good job. And if there's some more in the queue, we'll ask those here later. Moving on to rates real quick. Will VDOT reconsider the 1% escalation memo for 2000 or fiscal year 22 due to the pandemic and change in employment cost index?
At this point, I have not discussed it with leadership, but what I would not expect the 1% escalation rate to be adjusted, since this 1% is within the rates based on our current policy, which you can find that current policy on our website. That the rates is established based on the employment cost index, table 9, professional and scientific and technical positions. Some years it's 3%, some years it's 1%. We've been looking at it globally, kind of looking at it, how it's been falling out since 2017. And there's some years it's high, there's some years it's low, there's some years it's right in the middle. So unfortunately, this year's escalation rate is 1%, and I would not expect that to change, just because that it's honestly right within the parameters of our current policy.
Okay. Another question for rates: will the procurement task force, including the industry, have annual audits of the procurement process to measure success of current changes, as well as determining if rates are reasonable for subsequent years?
The procurement task force, they have been such valuable partners and so important in this variety of type of firms that are involved in that. They have served in a very, very important advisory role, and we will continue with them in that role. Our office will provide updates to the process as we continue to develop the classes and working title models and tweak it. For instance, if we need to add a class or if we need to add some other working titles, we're gonna review that with our procurement task force, certainly. But they will continue to act in an advisory role and not in an authoritative or auditing role. We do look forward to continuing our partnership with them.
Thanks, Dee. Next one, understanding that the design build contracts will continue to be procured through the APD, will GEC major pursuit contracts be taken on by your department moving forward?
Correct. APD will continue with design build projects that will stay entirely separate. In general, professional services will be supported by my office, and that will mean, across the board. With each RFP will be evaluated and handled by the lead divisions. And if it's determined that APD needs to be involved in some of those, then that'll be assigned, that'll be discussed with the chief engineer and the chief of administration. And PSPO will be involved in supporting whichever division is appointed as the lead division. It's likely going to be those lead divisions that are most related to that subject matter. For instance, the GEC and PSS have been shifted to the lead divisions with from APD to location and design.
Okay.
So,
and then a follow-up on that real quick, Dee. What about existing contracts?
Existing contracts, those will be handled in much the same way. We have some that are ongoing right now related to some supplements. I think there's a request for supplement on some of these out there, and we will be working with those lead divisions to identify the needs. We'll be looking in those when they're the GEC or the PSS or some of those projects that initiated in those mega project offices. We'll be working with the lead divisions of the mega project offices for them to establish their scope and their needs on, for those supplements. And then they will be facilitating the negotiated of rates or terms in that. And then my office will be supporting them through completing those documents and getting the necessary approvals.
All right.
Great.
Where will there be an appeals process if the negotiators in the industry can't reach, agreement, and will it be put into the procurement manual?
No, an appeals process is not being considered. An appeals process is not appropriate for procurement decisions. Leadership should not be engaged in the procurement process unless they were on the selection committee. Asking leaders or others to micromanage the process of staff selection during an active procurement because a few folks are placed in a category that may, impact, by a few dollars per hour is really not appropriate. Any challenges related to this or any questions related to this, once we have, established this process, please reach out to me. That is the whole role of our lead negotiator, is so that we can establish consistency, so that we can establish a good working relationship with the lead division and the prime to work through the staff placement. As I said, it's going to be an art, not a science. Our goal is to get you, our staff, placed by their qualifications and then grouped by their ranges, so that we can come to a fair and reasonable rate at the end of the day. I don't want to overpay, you guys, you don't want to I don't want to overpay you. You don't want me to underpay you. So didn't say that right, did I? I don't want to overpay the firms, and the firms don't want VDOT to underpay them. So let's all work together, please, and establishing a strong partnership in that. There will not be a need for an appeals process, because you're going to have an effective team working on your behalf. And then if you have ever any questions or concerns, you can always bring those to me. I can't fix what I was. Please touch base with me. Please let me know. But an appeals process is really not appropriate for to be established during an active procurement.
Okay,
So
thanks.
Gordon,
Yes,
Nancy,
Steve.
let me just chime in here, because I do think that that's a very important part that Dee has just identified. We do have the task group that has been formed and taking and soliciting input from industry as a whole and considering that with VDOT officials. Dee is the point of contact. So while there is not an appeals process that we're looking at implementing at this point in time, Dee is absolutely right. And I go back to my initial set of comments. We're interested in making sure that we have a fair and reasonable process, and are paying industry in that fair and reasonable means. And if there are inconsistencies that we're starting to find as this process gets up and underway, take it to Dee. She is the point of contact that will rectify that situation and has the authority to rectify that situation. But if there are minor one-offs in this and things like that, she is the arbitrator in this. It doesn't, we've had issues, and I'm confident that the task group working with industry, led by Dee and your folks, both ACEC and VTCA, will come to that resolution. But let the process work its way through. And look, it's not going to be right coming out of the gate, but we will be malleable in the approach, and flexibility is, I think, the key here. So Dee is the point of contact, and we need to run the process through what we have formed in a very collaborative manner.
Good explanation. Appreciate that. Thank you for that. Moving on to some other of the today's Q&A questions. When and how will the new process for adding personnel to current contracts, particularly those not identified as key personnel, be implemented?
As far as the timeline, I do not have a timeline today, but I have heard loud and clear that is some of our most important needs out there. So believe me, our staff, we've talked about it multiple times. It'll be a process that's going to be similar to using a staff award roster that you have now. So we're not going to modify it much. We're going to get it out to you guys and talk through the process internally with our internal stakeholders, and it is at the top of my priority list.
All right, I noticed there were a couple people that put questions in the chat, so I want to make sure we don't leave those out. One of the questions was, it sounds like there will be one roster with staff and rates for both prime and subs. Are rate negotiated an average of prime and sub staff rates together as opposed to the average rates by company?
No, ma'am. There will be rates. It will be rates per firm per class. So we are not blending, the primes and the subs together. We're not down to that level of simplicity, because that would bring on a whole nother level of complications, and we're not going to do that. That would be far too compressed. So we definitely are going to establish per firm per class those rates. So if you use 13, for instance, we had on this recent pilot, we had some firms that submitted staff in all 13 classes. So they resulted in having 13 rates to negotiate. So that's much better than having 40 or 50 as we had, resulting from our previous use when we had the 81 standard classifications. But yes, it will be by firm, by class.
Great. And just to let you know, we have just a few minutes left, and there are a number of questions here. We're not going to get through them all today. We'll make sure they get posted at some point, but we'll go through as many as we can here. We see that new key personnel resume format includes positions at previous companies. Do the position titles need to align with one of VDOT's new classifications?
Are they speaking in reference to the SF330? I mean, the replacement forms. I don't quite understand that question. Is that in relation to the RFP or the?
I'm thinking resumes, Dee. Yeah, I'm thinking it's resumes, and I don't think that would necessarily have to align. I think it's really what position they held on that project and how that experience directly relates to the scope of work that's being requested.
Correct. I would agree.
Good.
Don't feel like you have to choose hours. You use the position title that you had at that time.
Okay. Will staffing rosters be part of the MOA as in the past?
Yes, they will. We're actually working on that format right now. And quite honestly, we have realized that it's really going to be a beneficial tool in using that also. So we're hoping to eliminate some of those redundant pages that were in there and really use this data set to our advantage to present you a really concise format in your MOA.
Is the roster spreadsheet ready to be shared, posted for review, and prep for use in the future? Question mark. We really do appreciate the training briefings later this year.
Yes, we will be posting both the roster and as well as the list of classes and working titles on our website. That we'll be posting those at the same time we post this recording, so that you have all of those things collectively in one set for your future reference, and so that you can be reviewing them in advance of those informational sessions to be held later in September.
Okay. How will you handle supplements to existing contracts that were originally structured using categories and rates that don't follow the new classification and roster approach?
We will be handling those through the selection of using our menu of classes and working titles, and working with those lead divisions to identify what their needs are, and selecting from that menu of list and negotiating those rates based off of our new classes and working titles.
Okay. When new employees are being hired, they may be paid lower than what was originally proposed. Will they be denied because they are lower paid?
So when we go into staff placement for when we're adding staff to a contract, that will be an instance that we certainly look at the rate that you're, that the class and working title that you're requesting to place them into. If we're going to want to place them appropriately so that they're grouped with those with preferably we'll approach in the same manner. First, by their credentials and their skill sets. If we have to tweak where they belong based on their rate of pay, if they're paid either higher or lower than someone with comparable skill sets, then we're going to place them most closest within a group that's closest to their pay. I don't want to overpay you, and you don't want to, underpay me. So, I still didn't say that right. You know what I mean?
We know what you mean.
We need
Yeah.
to pay aligned. That is our goal. We don't want an imbalance of pay. We will first review them by credentials, but pay is really critical when we're adding staff.
All right. Was there discussion of how workforce development and career paths benefit in this initiative? And will it if it hasn't?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit, Nancy.
Was there discussion on how workforce development and career paths benefit in this initiative? And if not, will it?
We did not discuss that. One of the things that we discussed within the divisions and the task force members was the years of experience that were in the list of working titles and classes. And quite honestly, we made our best estimate on that. So what we're going to see out there, that we made some incremental estimates of like 5 to 10 years as medium level positions for some, and some of them you're going to see that it's 10 to 20 years goes to their more senior levels. It's really all according to what specific role and skill sets, the KSAs that belong to each particular position. And we tried to align what we worked very diligently to do was to align those entry-level positions with the appropriate class so that they would come in making a comparable amount for those in that industry set. For instance, an engineering technician. So we have engineering technicians that go all the way to technical specialist 1. Well, then data analyst, for instance, when we established that one as a new working title, we didn't take it all the way to technical specialist 1 because we know that an entry-level data analyst doesn't earn that small amount of money. They come in at a higher pay scale. That's just a fact. So we have aligned these positions with the real working title, with the real level of where they should be equitable, compensated in the market. That was our goal. And if we needed to cover all technical classes from 1 through 7, for instance, an engineering technician, that's what we did. But if we only needed to cover a few classes for that particular field, like data analyst, we only went from, I want to say it's like technical specialist, either 2 or 3 to 6. We tried to match those working titles with the industry market pay levels adequately. And that's where, as multiple people, Brian and Reed indicated during their explanation, is that during this pilot, we expanded them. We went into this originally with a pilot describing the perfect candidate. Okay, so like a signal engineer has 15 years of experience, and so we went in describing that perfect person. As we actually received the rosters from the firms, from the ATCS, as we were working with traffic engineering, Carol and Van, we quickly realized that we were getting submissions from their staff of signal engineers that had not 15 years, they'd have 20 years or 25 years or 5 years. So you have to be able to place all of them in the appropriate groups. So that's where we started expanding those number of positions to align with the needs that were established in those original rosters. So that's where we really are trying to be flexible and meet your needs, meet your staff where they are for the entry level all the way through their expert level.
Dee, thank you very much.
If I can just add,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I can just
Susan.
add on there very quickly, I think it's really to keep in alignment with those rates within those classifications.
Mm-hmm.
That granularity was needed in order to keep
Very
those
much.
rates in alignment through the negotiation and through the blending process. And it does lead to better average rates at the end of the day, to where there's not a huge disparity within each classification. And that was one of the major things that we learned coming out of the pilot with the technical specialists, is the need for that granularity, like Dee said, to meet your folks where they are.
Thank you for that. Greatly appreciate that. Folks, we are at the point where we're past time. I do want to thank VDOT for all of their time and input and resources they've put into this. I do thank the volunteers who have helped us get us to where we are. We recognize this is a work in progress. As I said before, this recording will be posted. We'll get this recording completed and get this out as soon as we can, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. Be on the lookout for follow-up discussions and trainings from the department. We have I greatly appreciated y'all's time today. Anything else for final comments?
Gordon,
I just want to thank, go ahead, Commissioner.
Nope, go ahead.
I just want to thank all the firms that worked with us throughout the pilot. You guys were super critical partners in this. I can't thank you enough for the great ideas that we gleaned from you, literally from the time that we started working with traffic engineering, Carol and Van and ATCS, all the way through the iterative process that we've worked through materials and then the SUE contracts as well. Kudos to Reed. He's just done a phenomenal job. And then all the firms that have participated and given us their valuable data. Even those outside of the pilot, we have had some firms that have been providing us some placement information from procurement task force members in an effort to help us look at and review this process. This has been a really, really comprehensive process with a lot of people contributing. And I just want to say thank you. You've all been very, very valuable throughout. And I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Commissioner?
All right, I want to thank industry as a whole for reigniting the conversation where we put the pause button back in 2020. This has been very valuable, but I do want to thank collectively the task force that has been put together both by industry and the department and the work that has gone in to get us to this point. Secondarily, I want to say thank you to Dee for stepping up to the plate and taking on this challenge. We've had a number of conversations, and I think we will find collectively that path forward to be able to make sure that we do have that vibrant and healthy consultant community to be able to be there, to be able to deliver our program. We've got a lot of work coming, and fingers crossed on the infrastructure bill. There'll be a little bit of a conversation next week when we meet, but Dee has stepped up to the plate, and I want to thank her for taking on this challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner.
Everyone have a good day.